Hi all, how are you? Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us today. And my name is Kapil, and I'm from 3 Pillar Global. I'm in the talent management team. So, we are 3 Pillar Global. We are a software product engineering company, and we are, working into totally product development lifecycle. Okay, and today we have gathered here for this meetup. Okay, the title of which is component driven development using React.js. So we all know, we all love React.js today, and React.js has taken over the industry like a phenomena. So we're going to discuss the various phenomenal aspects of React.js, React plus Redux, and several others. So before I start, I would like you to know that our team, which is consisting of Tarun, Ravish, and Raj, they have worked really hard for this meetup and the content of the meetup, and I'm really excited at the end. I mean, the kind of things they have come up with. So I'm really hoping that we're going to have a really informative and a kind of interactive session with the team. So first of all, I would like to call Tarun to take over, and he's going to cover the introduction section of section of React.js and few other things. Obviously, he's going to discuss with you. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Guru. So, how many of you already know about React? Yeah, many. So, the agenda for the meetup is like mainly to give you the direction what React is and how the component-driven development has evolved in the last few years. So, we will start with the agenda, like what we are going to cover in this. So mainly the overview of component-oriented web development, which will consist of like your JavaScript framework history. Like in the overview, we are going to cover mainly the JavaScript front-end framework evolution, like what are the changes has gone through in the last 10 years. And then little bit ES6 overview. That we have included just to give you a few syntax idea about ES6, because when you are working on React, most of the time you would be using that syntax. So that's, but we are not going to cover like it in detail, ES6 about. And then introduction into React, like, and then bootstrapping of React application. So that's the main area where we want to focus more, because that's the main thing with the React. Like you need to make a bundle of several other library to make it working. And then React plus Redux architecture. Somebody might ask like, why not Flux? So yeah, like Redux has been gearing up. So we have picked Redux with the React rather than using Flux. And then case study, like one of the product which we have worked with. And then what were the challenges in that product, and how React helped us to overcome that challenge. So let's start with history. So like okay, so let me clarify about like what we are not going to cover. When we talk about components, so first thing comes in our mind is like web component. So we are not going to talk much about it, because React component is a different type of component, but not completely as web component is, because that's a component which is moving towards the web component. So web component is the next level of the component altogether. That gives you the abstraction of the style as well, which React component doesn't. And then not detail about HTML5, JavaScript, ES6, Webpack, Redux, like not detail of Redux, but the main focus area is like how Redux works with the React, and like the Flux one, and the comparison with the other library, either it's Angular, Backbone, Ember or not. So we are not going to cover the comparison with those two. So let's move to the history part. So in the overview, like how the journey has been of a front end, like from the days when everything was coming from the server side, and then how the complete UI has been moved to the front end now. And like what the component is, like how it's different from MVC pattern and all. Yeah, so first thing which we usually comes into mind is like, everybody remembers that, right? Like everything was re-rendered when we were using any server-side technology, whether it's Rails, Django, or maybe like ASP.NET MVC or anything. So everything was coming from the server, and then whole view was being re-rendered. So the things started from like changing when Netscape and I introduced JavaScript, and people start using browser for other front-end manipulation and all. And then Ajax gave the gear up to it, like you started using changing the views which was coming from the server, but yeah, using Ajax and all, you were making rendering it on the UI itself. And then jQuery played a major role actually, because when the jQuery came into the picture, then most of the front end or maybe the DOM manipulation part came on the browser side, and we started using jQuery a lot for the HTML rendering and all. The data was coming in the Ajax, and then we were rendering the all HTML component by doing the HTML manipulation using jQuery. So that's the time when people started moving towards the front end. And then the gear up was given by the Node.js and several dev tools. So that's another revolution came in, and then there are certain standard and certain rule set were there, and some dev tools which were created by like your browser community as well, which helped the front end developer to work in that direction, and people started working mainly on the front end side. And then that MVC framework and single page application exploded. So when you started like too much of front end code was there, so the biggest challenge was to manage that code, because when you were using jQuery, so like large files were there, and then you came up with a module and all, and maybe the name spacing, you try to manage those things up, but there was no I would say architecture pattern was not defined at that time. And then community was mainly coming from the server side thing, so they borrowed certain principles from that, and then the MVC was the first one which came into a picture, and they tried to replicate that MVC here in the front end side. So that's how MVC came in. Then we came with a component based development that enters later when MVC, like lot of MVC framework were there, and then people start realizing what are the challenges are coming with the MVC framework. So that's then this component based development came into a scene, like when even the JavaScript community declared that they are working on the web component, and at the same time like other frameworks started thinking into that direction, like the future will be the web component, and we should start thinking in that direction, like our development and our style of development on the front end should be a component driven. Yeah, so this is just to tell you like how the things were quite easy at that like earlier when the server side was there. You were just sending a request, and then at that time just HTML manipulation was there on the server side, and just you were getting that. So only single point of contact was there, like you are sending a request and receiving a response. So browser was quite dumb at that time, like just its work was just to send that. So let's come to the component. So in a pure grammatical thing, like component is what? It is like element of a larger whole. So it is nothing but like whether you work on any technology, whether it's a front end, back end, you always try to modularize your code. You always try to break your system into a small pieces so that every piece have a meaning in itself. It should be a functional unit which can be combined with anything. So it's a way to break the things, and then you make several components out of your application, and you assemble those and make a bigger component. That's what it is. So when we talk about React component, what it gives you a view, event handling, and UI state. So it's nothing but I would say like a march to modularity, and is another way to manage the complexity. So it's a way to give an abstraction to your development style mainly. So whether it's a server-side technology or client-side, you always try to give abstraction. So in the front end, the abstraction is given by the component here. So the question comes in like why component? Obviously, the scalability, consistency, maintainability, and like mainly the requirement design process improvement. So scalability comes in like if you have a component library along with you, you have defined your the number of components in your application, and you come up with a new requirement or feature. Then what you do is like you know that these are the component I already have, and then it's quite easy to build that feature using the existing component. So that helps in accelerating the development approach. And the consistency is like, of course, across the portfolio, you might be having a multiple application in your company, and for the complete portfolio, you want to standardize the design on altogether. So what you do is like these component helps you to make the consistent behavior across the application. And maintainability, yes, of course, because it's creates a sustainable technical architecture which helps you to maintain your code base very well. Yeah, so like how the things are different from MVC to component based development actually. So if you look at this like MVC on server, so there were only 2 points of contact was there. That's quite easy, like you were sending the request to the controller, and then controller was sending back the response to the view. So the state was not being managed at the client side at all. Things were quite clear, like if you maybe click a button on the client, even in that case a new route goes to the server, and then server gives you HTML. Whether you enter a data and then do something like that, so even in that case like your new URL goes to the server and then the new HTML comes back. So your data flow was predefined in that case. It was quite simple, like data flow was unidirectional, like only in, there was no multiple back and forth state communication was there actually. But when you talk about client-side MVC, when we borrowed the same practice here on the front end, whether you take an example of Angular or maybe any other framework, what happens in that case? Your view send an event to the controller, and your view also send the data to the controller. So it's like there are 2 things were done by the controller. So your single responsibility principle doesn't work in that case. So your controller is managing your UI state as well as application state. So that was a bigger problem which is there in the MVC when you work on the front end, because you are not your model like is maybe take an example of maybe a JavaScript object for the product or maybe employee comes in, and you assign it to a model. So that model is handling a multiple responsibility. It is not only handling the application state, because application state comes from the server, but you need a certain object or maybe the properties to manage the UI state as well. Maybe like the selected button or maybe selected employee. Then you will have to create several properties around that to make that this is the UI state properties around that. So that's how the principle of, again, the model is also breaking the principle of single responsibility in that case. So when the problem gets started, you can understand from that, like you can, those who came from the Angular background or maybe can understand it better. Maybe you have multiple model and multiple views, and those things like when there are multiple events and multiple communication across the views, so multiple models are connecting with multiple views and multiple views are connecting with multiple models in that way. So your in large applications it's very difficult to determine like what's the data flow is in that. So that's the biggest challenge here is, because you don't know, that's not predictable at all, like the entry point for a particular view for the data from where it is coming, because there are multiple model which might be managing the same view. So that's the biggest problem with that approach. So that's how component based came into a picture, and React gave us a great push in that direction. And like there's a single source like the store, and if something need to be changed on the view, it has to come through the store only. So that data flow in that diagram is a unidirectional. So there is no multiple source of data in that case actually. So that's the biggest difference which you see when you come from the MVC to the component-based development. So we will talk about it in detail, that, like how the unidirectional flow works. That we'll talk about in the upcoming slides, maybe when we were talking about Redux one. So I'll just pass over the things to Ravish here.